Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel Liu. I'm the Medical Affairs from Nestle Health Science Malaysia. Thank you very much for taking time joining us for today's webinar on intermittent fasting and very low-calorie diet for weight loss. It's a great honor to collaborate with the Malaysia Association for the Study of Obesity for organizing this webinar. So before we begin, there are a few things to take notes in terms of housekeeping. So all participants will be muted and will be placed on this listening mode for the entire webinar. You may submit your questions through the Q&A box, as there will be a Q&A session towards the end. So after the webinar, there's a short survey will be sent to you via email, and your feedback is greatly appreciated. So without further ado, let me welcome our chairman for today's webinar, Dr. Muhammad Ismail Noel, who is an emeritus professor in nutrition, University Kebangsaan Malaysia, where he served for 35 years. He's currently a visiting professor in University Sultan Zainal Abidin. So Prof. Ismail is the president of the Malaysian Association for the Study of Obesity and also the chairman for the Technical Working Group on Nutritional Guidelines, Ministry of Health. His major research interests includes energy requirements, energy balance, obesity, nutritional status of selected population groups, including sports nutrition. So let's all welcome Professor Ismail. Pass it over to you, Prof.
Can you see me?
Not yet, Prof. Yep.
Okay.
Over to you.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon to all attending this webinar. And a good morning to Dr. Michelle Harvie, joining us from Manchester in the UK. I'm delighted to chair this webinar hosted by the Nestle Health Sciences in collaboration with the Malaysian Association for the Study of Obesity, MASO. As we all are aware, the recent National Health Mobility Survey 2019, released by the Ministry of Health, revealed an estimated 3.9 million adults suffered from diabetes. The increase in prevalence of this type 2 diabetes has contributed significantly to a parallel increase in the prevalence of overweight and obesity in Malaysia. And as we know, about half the adult Malaysian population are either overweight or obese. So the objective of this webinar is to present and discuss various applications related to very low calorie diets as part of intermittent fasting as an alternate strategy for weight management and type 2 diabetes. We actually have two speakers, one from the UK and one local. But first, let me introduce our first speaker, Dr. Michelle Harvie from Manchester, the UK. Dr. Harvie is a research dietitian at the Prevent Breast Cancer Unit in Manchester, and she is a registered dietitian since 1991, but turned to be a researcher as a dietitian, and since 2001, that's a good 20 years ago. So her research involves looking or testing at low-calorie diets, including pioneering intermittent low-calorie 5 and 2 diets, which I think she's very famous for in the UK. This diet actually focus on prevention and management of cancer, which initially and now has evolved and extended to the management of diabetes. Dr. Harvie has some 74 peer-reviewed publications, including 12 trials and reviews concerning intermittent diets. And her 5-in-2 diet has been adopted by numerous dietetic departments in the UK and across a number of weight management settings, including Tier 3 weight management services. So for today, I'm sure we have a very well-versed uh, colleague, dietitian, yeah, that will talk and discuss the Midas study, which evaluate and the acceptability and effectiveness of an intermittent low energy versus continuous low energy diet in people living with type 2 diabetes. With that brief introduction, may I call upon Dr. Harvie to present her talk.
Okay. Okay. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes. Okay.
Yes, and you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So thank you very much for that kind introduction. Yes, so it's a beautiful, good afternoon or good morning. It's a beautiful morning here in Manchester. The sun is shining already. And I was interested to hear your 50% overweight and obese. Of course, we're a little bit ahead of Malaysia, unfortunately, in the obesity stakes. We have 65% of people who are overweight or obese, of which about 30% are obese in the UK. It's not increasing anymore, but clearly we have a big problem, and hence the work. So as you said, I'm actually a research dietitian in Manchester, starting out really working in preventing breast cancer, but clearly weight management has applications to other areas. And my disclosure is I have written 3 self-help books for intermittent fasting, and all the proceeds go to the charity Prevent Breast Cancer, not to me personally. Okay, so in my talk this afternoon, I'm going to review what we know about standard dieting versus intermittent, what we prefer to call energy restriction. A lot of people call it intermittent fasting, but it's the same thing. The idea that you do a diet a few days a week and not every day, and then to focus on the very low energy diets. And as you say, to show you the results of our Midas study. So our Midas study was focused on people with overweight and obesity and type 2 diabetes. And I guess I don't need to tell this audience, remind this audience of the importance of overweight and obesity to type 2 diabetes. We know it, obesity increases the risk 7-fold, and weight loss actually reduces risk of getting diabetes by about 60%. And of course, this isn't a new phenomena. It's been known for years, and I'm sure perhaps many of you have seen a report by Rollo and back 200 years ago, where they made this observation where they were putting people on low-calorie diets. And this report shows 2 important observations. One is that if you put someone get someone to lose weight, put them on a low-calorie diet, and they lose a lot of weight, then you can either eliminate the diabetes, certainly control the diabetes better, as they did here. So this person ended up not having glycosuria. And the other important point about this this report is it also highlighted the fact that, of course, a lot of people struggle to follow this diet. So there was one officer who responded to the diet, but he just couldn't follow it. So if we can get people to lose weight, follow low-calorie diets, then that can potentially really help manage their diabetes. But of course, people find it difficult to do. So, there we go. Okay, so what are the approaches? So the standard approach to getting people to lose weight and diet, of course, is following a diet every day. So this would generally be asking someone to reduce their calories by about 1/4 on a daily basis. So this could be any type of diet. This could be a Paleolithic diet, an Atkins diet, a Mediterranean diet, a sort of 600 calorie deficit diet. So whatever dietary diet people are generally trying to do. It's a daily diet that reduces your calories by about a quarter, and they do work if people can follow them. So, but generally we have about, a third of people being able to follow these diets, and at the end of 12 months, we'll have about 20 to 40% of people losing what we consider to be a significant amount of weight loss, about 5%. And the other issue with these diets is that when people are following these diets and they're in a level of calorie restriction, you get some metabolic benefits in terms of things like insulin and lipids, but when glucose control. But some of these actually attenuate when somebody then goes back into energy balance. Even if they don't regain the weight, some of the metabolic benefits are due to the fact that they're in an energy restriction mode. So back actually now about 15 years ago, we started thinking about whether people could diet differently and whether we could make dieting easier for people to do, and also whether it might have better metabolic effects. So this is where we came up with the idea of the intermittent, the 5-2 diet, as you've just described. And in our hands, this 5-2 diet is again asking someone to reduce their calories by about a quarter over the week, but we're doing it over 2 days of more intense calorie restriction. So 2 very low energy days where they're not totally fasted, but they're having about 25% of their energy requirements, and they're 75% restricted. And the other approach, which of course has been demonstrated to be very effective in a huge number of studies, including the direct, the droplet, the Midas study, is this idea of having a very intensive period of dieting upfront, often with meal replacements. So an 800-calorie diet where you take people off their food and they follow this to anything between 8 and 20 weeks, and you get a very intensive weight loss at the start. So these are the approaches we're going to talk about. And just a very simple, I think it's useful to have in our minds, what if people could follow those diets, which of course is the big challenge, what sort of weight loss would you expect the different approaches to give you? So here is a model of what might happen if you had a man with obesity who was sedentary with a BMI of 35. If you put them on a standard low-calorie diet, a daily restriction, an intermittent restriction, or the very low energy diets over a period of 6 months. So the daily calorie restriction on average are actually, as you can see, not that different, and the weight losses would be slightly greater, you would expect, for the intensive low energy upfront meal replacement type diets. But again, they're not massively different, and there's a similar story obviously for women. So in theory, if people could follow all of these diets, the weight losses would be broadly similar. But of course, that's the $60 million question, isn't it? How you get people to follow these diets. So intermittent diets, as I've already said, is something that we've been studying a lot, certainly over the last 15, 16 years in Manchester, and of course other people have around the world. So the idea was that perhaps people struggle to follow a daily diet, and so if they only had to think about it a couple of days a week, would it be easier? And as I say, would it have these metabolic benefits? And we know that there are beneficial effects of just following a low-calorie diet, and that a lot of the benefits you get with weight loss, you perhaps see, particularly things like blood glucose, you'll see within the first few weeks of the diet, just when they're on a low-calorie diet. And as I say, some of them do attenuate. So there is something about low-calorie diets that may be particularly effective. So if you can keep them going, pulsed every week, there may be a benefit. And there are lots of proposed benefits with intermittent fasting. I have to say that most of these have actually not been proven. These are things that are mooted. If you read lots of reviews, people will cite these things. The interesting things actually that do have some traction are certainly the intermittent diets seem to improve what we call metabolic flexibility. So perhaps not surprisingly, if somebody flips between a higher and a lower calorie intake on a weekly basis, they do seem to be better at coping with higher calorie periods of higher calorie intake and also periods of not eating. So that metabolic flexibility is extremely important for our health, and it's what we're actually designed to be able to do. And unfortunately, as we get heavier, we tend to lose that ability to flip-flop. The other sort of aspects on here are really potentially very interesting, but there isn't a huge amount of evidence to back up these claims, and obviously more research is being done. But generally, for a given amount of weight loss, a lot of the effects of intermittent and continuous dieting seem to be fairly similar. So do people lose more weight on intermittent diets than they do with a daily restriction? So you'll find numerous studies, which of course have their merits, which will have just got people following an intermittent diet, show weight loss, show nice reductions in some of the metabolic markers. That's all great, but I guess to me the important question is, do they function as well as, or better, or not as well as the standard diet that we were trying to find an alternative to? So there are a number of trials, not a huge amount, that have compared intermittent to standard daily dieting, sort of match for energy. And this is a nice overview that was published earlier this year. And this is showing, so in the short term, these are studies that were sort of less than 6 months, and these are longer term studies, which of course is the really important one. But in the short term, there seems to be a modest weight loss benefit in terms of intermittent diets versus continuous of about 1.6 kilos. So, so in the short term, there are some benefits. So people find it slightly easier to do short term, but of course, it's the long term that you really want to see. And long term, greater than 6 months, really, there isn't much data, which is one of the issues. The diets seem to perform fairly similarly. And I think one of the important things to note is that nobody's really, the long-term data in these studies has really come from a period of not supporting people in the long term. So they've generally done 6-month studies and then followed them up either at 12 months or 24 months. And so nobody's really looked at whether in a longer term supported model, an intermittent diet might be easier for people to follow than a continuous. I think that's an important question, and we really don't know. It may not, but generally when you don't support people either doing an intermittent or a continuous diet, both groups tend to regain some weight and they end up being the same. So what about, the reason, apart from the weight, we were thinking there may be this metabolic advantage to this intermittent diet if somebody's continuing to have periods of calorie restriction in the week. And again, because a lot of these things are driven by the weight, which is similar, a lot of markers are the same. There does seem to be a slight advantage in terms of fasting insulin and HDL cholesterol. And it's important to note that the biomarkers that are being represented on this slide have come from trials where it's been deliberately measured away from the fasting days. We know that if we measure these things on fasting days, the intermittent patients will have better profiles. So what this is saying is that there seems to be even an advantage in some, but no means all, of the metabolic profiles, even away from the fasting days in people doing intermittent fasting. Okay, so what about people with type 2 diabetes, which is the focus of our Midas study, which I'll come to. So the best and longest study on this has been done by Peter Clifton's group, and the primary author is Carter in Australia. And they compared, it wasn't energy matched, but they compared an intermittent energy restricted diet, 550 calories 2 days a week, to a standard daily low calorie diet. As you'll see, that the study was slightly skewed in that the low calorie diet, if they followed it, should have had a greater level of energy restriction. So these were people with type 2 diabetes. They had diabetes for some period of time. And so they had a supported program for 6 months where they were having face-to-face meetings every other week, and then it went to 3 monthly. And then at 12 months, neither group got any support. And this is showing, so the weight loss over the study was fairly similar between the two groups. By 24 months, both groups have actually started regaining weight, but as I said, neither group was supported, so there's no difference. In terms of the important thing, of course, is what happened to their blood glucose control and their HbA1c. So there were sort of nice reductions in both groups at the end of the 12 months, which were not different between the two groups. And then, of course, understandably, predictably, when people gain weight, that they both went up. So there were no real, and I think the going up there is probably just showing the natural progression of their type 2 diabetes. So fairly similar results with type 2 diabetes. Okay, so so what about these intensive formula-based sort of 800-calorie diets that people do up front? So, you know, they certainly are effective, and I'm just showing you, there are a number of studies that have shown this. I'm just showing you one called the OptiWin study, which used the Nestle Optifast product. And in this study, it was conducted in America over about 9 centres, and patients with overweight and obesity, not exclusively with diabetes, but including some, quite a lot with pre-diabetes, as you can see, a range of ethnicities, were recruited and randomised to either a continuous low energy diet where they had 16 weeks of an 800, either an 800-calorie diet, or if their BMI was over 45, they were on a 960. And it was primarily on using the Optifast formula diet. And or they were randomised to a, that should actually say continuous energy restriction, I do apologise, to a standard 600-calorie deficit, low energy diet. Now, both groups were supported, which I think is really important to note. So over 12 months, let me just, okay. So over 12 months, certainly the standard continuous diet with support did reasonably well. They were losing on average, you know, 6%. 6% of their weight at 26 weeks, and it was maintained at 52 weeks. But you can see that this was really doubled when people actually followed the very low energy formula-based diet. So they were getting a weight loss of 10% at the end. And I think that, you know, the reason these diets are very effective is they take people away from their food. People don't feel as hungry. They get some ketones, which reduces some of the hunger hormones as well. And they generally, and the rate of weight loss is rapid. They lose, you know, they can lose about 1.5 kilos a week, and it's very motivational. So these, you know, so the standard diet did actually work when it was supported, but clearly we're getting better results with these continuous low energy diets. Okay. So, and these have been shown to be highly effective in patients with overweight and obesity and type 2 diabetes. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the Direct study, which was conducted in the UK across about 40 different primary care GP practices in the UK in patients with type 2 diabetes. And this only included patients who've been diagnosed in the last 4 years. And they were all had overweight and obesity. And they were randomised to either this continuous low energy diet, which was anything between 8 and 20 weeks of the formula 800-calorie diet. And in this study, the control group didn't actually get, they got standard written dietary advice to follow a sort of 600-calorie deficit, but they didn't actually get a behavioural change support program. Okay, and so and after they'd done the periods of 8 to 20 weeks of the very low calorie diet, if they relapsed, the low calorie diet group could then have a period of going back on the diet. And then there was a weight loss maintenance phase. So they were supported every month with a face-to-face appointment all the way through. So the control group didn't get the diet, but they also didn't get the support. And at the end of so about 60% of the patients got all the way through the program. So what did they show? So so basically the diet was definitely highly effective, or much more effective than doing nothing effectively. So they lost more weight, had reductions in HbA1c of about nearly 5 millimoles per mole. And the important thing on this study was that these reductions in HbA1c were seen alongside the patients coming off their diabetes medications. So at the start of the study, you know, nearly 3/4 of the patients were on diabetes medications, and this was nearly halved in the group who were on the diet. So, and this is so the definition of diabetes remission is being off medication for 6 months. So in this study, at the end of the year of this intervention, we had about 45% of the patients in the diet arm going into remission versus only 4% of the control group. There was some attenuation of this at 24 months. They were still being supported in terms of behaviour support and the follow-up appointments, and they could still go on a recovery package of the drinks, and about a third of them were going still off their medications and in remission. So it's all very impressive, and so part of the success of these diets, I think, is the fact that they are, is it because they're formulas and you're taking people away from food? Could you achieve the same results if you had an intensive, very low-calorie diet that was food-based up front instead of the formula drinks? And there are some studies that show this. So this was one published, 11 years ago now, and this randomised patients, so it was an intensive behavioural support programme. So patients with obesity were randomised to either follow 16 weeks of an intensive 1,000-calorie diet that was either formula-based or was a food-based diet. And then at the end of that period, they had the behavioural support was still there, but really whittled down. And they were still using 2 of the meal replacement drinks a day, but they were allowed normal food as well, whereas before they were just on 4 of the drinks a day. And you can see there's a very impressive weight loss, particularly in the formula group. So clearly the adherence to the formula was better than the food-based diet, but people were still regaining weight. Now this impressive result at 16 weeks, of course, means at the end of the year you're getting a better weight loss with a upfront formula thing, and it's generally a difference of about a couple of kilos. This review has taken this and a number of other studies and suggested that in the long term, having an upfront formula-based low-calorie diet probably gives you an advantage of about 2 kilos over a food base, and because it's easier for people to do behaviourally. So just to summarise, these diets, so they can all work, and of course they are more suited for certain populations than others. So if we think about the standard daily dieting, this is probably the safest approach for most people. And it can be used in people with type 2 diabetes, and it could be used in people with renal failure with supervision. The other 2 approaches, the intermittent fasting, is probably not ideal for people with frailty or eating disorders. So you see that their applicability needs to a bit more thought, and particularly the continuous low energy diets are not appropriate for certain conditions. Okay. So, and then in terms of adverse events, there are few. I mean, obviously, when people lose weight, any weight reduction, one of the adverse effects is you get a decrease in bone density and bone health. So, with a standard low-calorie diet and weight loss, there is a slight increase in fractures. But some of the concerns that these intermittent diets or very low energy diets in people with diabetes are going to cause either hypo or hyperglycemia are not borne out by the evidence. And I think for the purposes of time, I won't run through this. The only real sort of, there are some minor side effects of these diets in terms of the very low energy diets sort of are linked to some issues with headaches and fatigue, and some sort of thinning of hair in perhaps 1 out of 5 patients, or some issues with constipation. But the most serious effect that can happen is some gallstones, which you can see there is not that common. Okay, so these 3 approaches can work. They're generally well tolerated. So intermittent diets are basically a viable alternative to continuous diets. They're probably no better in terms of long-term adherence, but they're well tolerated generally. And continuous low energy diets certainly are more effective for weight loss, but they do require medical supervision, but they are generally well tolerated. And formula diets definitely have, certainly in the shorter term, an advantage. But we do need to look at the effects on the microbiome, because obviously they're a very limited diet. They're certainly not a long-term solution. Okay, so I would like to present our Midas trial. So given what I've told you about intermittent and intermittent diets and the continuous low energy diets, you know, because of all the interest in the very low energy upfront formula diets producing this effective weight loss and diabetes remission, certainly in the UK, our health service is actually now rolling out a programme where patients are put on these diets for 8 to 20 weeks and supported. So that seems to be the model of care that's being adopted. And so I guess we were thinking, well, they certainly work. There's no disputing that. But, you know, are they suitable for everybody? A lot of people would probably be put off by the idea of being off food for 20 weeks. And also, you know, weight regain does happen with these diets. So could an intermittent approach perhaps help with that? So our study was really, it's a randomized, it's a feasibility study. So we're not powered to show differences, but it's a feasibility to show the potential efficacy and feasibility of an intermittent low energy diet versus the continuous. And our program was actually remotely delivered. We did this before COVID, so we didn't actually have face-to-face appointments. It was all supported with an app. The primary outcomes are we're looking at uptake, retention, whether we're getting people out of a high HbA1c, and whether they're losing significant amounts of weight, and also looking at adverse events and diabetes medications. So here's our diet. So the continuous low energy diet, we actually did 8 weeks of an 800-calorie diet, followed by 4 weeks food introduction, and then they went on a calorie-controlled Mediterranean healthy diet for the rest of the year. Our intermittent diet was doing the same number of low-calorie days that they did in the 8 weeks, but spreading it out over a period of so they did 2 days a week for 28 weeks. It's the same number of days. And on the intervening days of the week, they followed, again, the Mediterranean diet. And then at the end of that, they went on a 24-week intermittent food-based diet. And if they regain weight, they could go back on their initial program once. Now, we didn't take people off, we took people off hypertensive medication when they started the trial, because we know that generally the blood pressure will drop. We actually left patients on metformin, but we stopped all their other diabetes medication in the continuous group. And in the intermittent group, we took them off the drugs which were likely to cause hypoglycemia, particularly things like sulfonylureas, on their intermittent days. And as I say, they were supported by a multidisciplinary team, which involved a dietitian, diabetes nurse, exercise specialist, and psychologists for patients who were flagged up to have psychological problems, potential psychological problems at the start. And they were supported by this remote Aviva app. So the eligibility, so it's important to note that we were trying to be a bit more inclusive. So we were trying to get a representative population. So we had patients who had diabetes for a bit longer. We also took patients who did have quite a lot of psychological morbidity, and I'll come on to that later. So this is who we recruited. So it was, you know, half men, half women, which is good. And we did have groups from different ethnicities. The important thing to note on here is that when we screened patients at the start for their anxiety, depression, and self-efficacy scores, about 40% of them were scoring quite badly on those scores, and they were actually referred, but they had psychological support. So And we know that those patients generally are patients who don't do as well. So I think it's quite nice that we were able to include them in our study. So we recruited from primary care, the hospital, and also word of mouth. And we had a pretty good uptake. We had 35% of people who invited from primary care took to our study, which is compared to about 20% for the direct study I showed you earlier. And then importantly, we were able to show that, so at the end of the year, we did have a reasonably good retention, about 70% of our patients stayed in. So, okay, so what happened to their weight loss? So at the, quite predictably, the group who did the upfront 8 weeks of continuous diet were losing weight more quickly than the group who were doing it over a 28-week period. So this shows you the weight loss in the intermittent versus the continuous. So at 12 weeks, and this group have done all their intensive dieting by then, the continuous group had lost about nearly 10% versus nearly 6%. The intermittent group continued to lose, and so by the 28 weeks, when they've both effectively done the same level of calorie restriction, you see we're getting the same amount of weight loss. And then in the weight loss maintenance or continued weight loss phase, unfortunately, we're seeing a drift up, which you often see. We did very, very minimal support in this period, and certainly our next interventions would include more. They had monthly text messages, and it was very, very hands-off, and we didn't really use all the options of peer support that we could have done. So so that, you know, but at the end of the year, basically both groups, they have lost weight, but they were very similar. And in terms of whether they their HbA1c was less than 48, i.e., you know, that's the definition of diabetes. We had 42% in both groups who'd fallen below that, but of course some of them were still on medication here. Some of them were still on metformin. As I said, we deliberately didn't take them off of metformin. We were getting 20% with 10% weight loss or more, and nice reductions in HbA1c. But one of the points is that the intermittent diet group were on slightly more medications. So at the end of the year, this is what had happened to people in terms of the diabetes medications, which of course was if you remember, the direct study ended up with you know, about 40% of people still coming off their medications, which was really, really great result. So at the end of our study, certainly the continuous group, you know, we had about 40% that decreased their medications. Nobody increased. The intermittent group, although their weight loss was very similar, we weren't seeing such you know, beneficial effects perhaps on the medications that they were able to come off. Now, this may be, because it's a small study, it may be that these were the types of patients that they weren't quite balanced at the start. It may be something to do with the different effect of an intermittent, a slower weight loss at the start with an intermittent diet. So they were certainly, the adherence was pretty good. Certainly in the weight loss phase, they were doing, self-reported, about 80% of their low calorie days. Unfortunately, in the intermittent group, though, in this weight loss, the continued weight loss maintenance phase, where they were supposed to be still doing 2 days of a food-based low-calorie diet, you can see only about a third of them were still doing it. There were a few serious adverse events, but most of these were not related to the diets at all. It's just what happens to people, especially people with type 2 diabetes. There were 3 episodes of gallstones, 2 in the continuous and 1 in the intermittent group. And people were generally happy to use the app, but I think we didn't perhaps use all the functions. So the conclusions from this study were that certainly in this feasibility study, it's not powered to show, to make, you know, firm conclusions, but the feasibility study shows that a remotely delivered intermittent and continuous low energy diet programs, remotely supported, can help people lose weight, reduce their HbA1c, and help them reduce their medication for type 2 diabetes. And so I say, particularly if we get the behavioural aspects of these programs right, I think they would be highly effective. So, I think the nice thing about this study is our results are not as impressive as something like the direct, but we've only got 8 weeks of dieting versus 20 that they had there. We've got a much more complex group here, so it's nice to show that we've got these results in these complex patients with psychological issues. So certainly there's some tantalizing evidence here that we can help people with weight problems and with type 2 diabetes with these diets. So certainly, we do need more research, don't we? We need larger trials. We always do. We need to look at, the role of intermittent diets and remote support for weight loss maintenance. Nobody's really looked at that properly. People just leave people and expect them to spontaneously carry on with the diet, which is probably quite unrealistic. And also we need to look at the relative benefits of these diets across different groups. We're actually doing some work in Manchester with patients with intermittent low energy diets and gestational diabetes, also type 1 diabetes. And I think we really need to understand, so our data perhaps suggests that the intermittent, a formula-based diet spread over 28 weeks rather than doing it intensely over 8 may not be as effective for diabetes remission. And I think we need to do more mechanistic work to look at its relative effects on things like, pancreatic fat stores. And also there is some intriguing evidence from Walter Longo's group that intermittent fasting may be actually useful for helping regenerate the pancreas. They've certainly got some very sort of preclinical data on this. So, lots of interesting things that we need to look at. So I would like to acknowledge certainly the funders of our Midas trial, Nestle and Aviva, who provided the app, and importantly our fantastic team at Manchester who worked on this study. So my co-PI, Dr. Issa, and our fantastic team of dietitians, Sarah and Avni, and the whole team. It was a real collaborative effort. So, and of course the trial participants who agreed to go on these diets. So thank you for your attention.
So thank you, Dr. Harvie, for the comprehensive review of some of the VLCDs, and you ended up with the Midas trial. Now we shall move on to the second speaker, and we have with us today Ms. Foong Pui Hing. Ms. Foong is a senior principal dietitian at the National Health Institute, Kuala Lumpur. She has 20 years of experience in the field of dietetics, both in Malaysia and Singapore. And she apparently obtained her Bachelor of Science in Dietetics from UKM. That is where I come from. Okay, and she continued her studies doing masters in advanced healthcare, majoring in healthcare education, and professional diploma in cardiovascular and thoracic sciences, both at the Liverpool John Moores University Hospital in the United Kingdom. So she, being Malaysian, will tell us a bit more about her real world of as a dietitian treating patients using VLCD in the Institute of National Heart Institute in KL. So with that, Ms. Foong, the floor is yours.
Thank you to Prof. Ismail for the kind introduction. Right, so today I would like to share on my experience of conducting a pilot VLCD program in the National Heart Institute, IJN in short. Can you see my slide? All right, okay. So we have conducted this pilot program last year, And I think as what Prof. Ismail mentioned earlier, obesity in Malaysia is on the rise. And based on the National Health and Mobility Survey in 2019, 1 in 2 adults in Malaysia were overweight or obese. This is based on the body mass index of more than 25. And 1 in 2 adults in Malaysia have abdominal obesity. And this is based on waist circumference of more than 90 cm for men and more than 80 cm for women. And looking at these statistics, the ladies are more affected compared to the guys in this area. So, and healthcare professionals are also affected by this. So that's why it triggered our team to actually do something about this obesity issue. So what we did was we wanted to have a program which is quite straightforward for them to follow and for them to lose weight significantly. So we want them to reduce 5 to 10% of their weight in 8 weeks using a VLCD program. So in this program, we allow about 10 staff to join, those with BMI more than 28 on volunteer basis. They should be able to commit to this program for 8 weeks. And in these 8 weeks to join 4 sessions of measurement and discussion with the same dietitian every 2 weeks in a group setting. They also will join the WhatsApp group chat so that at any point of time they have any doubts or challenges, they can actually post their questions and discussion in this chat group. The exclusion criteria for this program was any staff who had recent myocardial infarct, any major surgery, those diabetes on insulin, those with chronic kidney disease or end-stage kidney disease on dialysis, cancer, pregnant, and breastfeeding. So these are excluded. So the method used was we actually prescribed 3 VLCD formulas per day, which provides 800 calories, 60 grams of protein per day for 8 weeks. And also we allow them to have some clear soups and salads during this time. So we actually discussed and shared the recipes. For those days that they are unable to follow 3 VLCD formulas per day, we also discussed the option of lower calorie meals. We allow them to have any Q&A in the WhatsApp group and during the sessions every 2 weeks, and encourage them to do exercise about 30 minutes 5 times per week. For the monitoring every 2 weeks, we actually use a simple body composition tool, which is the Carada scan. We took their weight and calculated their body mass index. We also calculated their total and percentage of weight loss, took their waist circumference, and we also monitored their body fat percentage, visceral fat, and body age. These are actually come together with the meter, so it's more of a monitoring tool for them. So the profile of the participants, we had 10 participants, 8 nurses and 2 from food services. And these are actually one of the bigger departments in the whole organization. So that's why the participants come from these 2 departments. 7 staff had no medical conditions. The other 3 remaining staff, 1 had hypertension, 1 had hyperlipidemia, and 1 had type 2 diabetes on oral hypoglycemic agents, but they're all under monitoring and well controlled. Yeah. So all the participants were ladies. Their age between 32 to 56 years. But when they do the body composition monitoring, they found out that their body age range between 52 to 72. So during the baseline measurement, actually they were quite sad when they saw this. Their weight ranged between 74.4 to 98 kilo, BMI 29 to 41.8, so they were all overweight and obese. Their body fat percentage was between 36.9 to 43.5. The waist circumference was between 94.5 to 102 cm, and visceral fat between 11 to 27. So this is the results for these 10 participants. So I just highlighted the top 3 achievers for this program. The one that actually lost the most weight was about 9.7 kilos, or close to 10 kilos, and that was about 12.8% of her initial weight, which is actually quite significant. So she actually dropped 4 units from BMI, lost 10.5 cm of her waist circumference, body fat percentage lost by 4.2%, visceral fat was lost by 4 points, and the best part was she was so overjoyed when the body age reduced by 7 years. I guess for a lot of ladies, this is very motivational for them. So let me go through the summary of the results. Yeah. So the percentage of total weight loss for participants, as you can see from this pie chart, 60% of them lost more than 5% of their initial weight. So this is actually a very good achievement for them, and this is very significant. And as for the average weight loss per participant, as you can see from this graph, during the first 2 weeks, they lost about 3 kilos. By week 4, they lost about another 1 kilo. Week 6, another 1.1. By week 8, the average weight actually increased a little by 0.2. So during this week 4 to week 6, that was when there was a public holiday, Hari Raya Haji celebrations, and probably that could be one of the reasons why they didn't lose a lot of weight during week 4 to week 6 as compared to the first 2 weeks. And when we look at the average weight loss from baseline, so the first 2 weeks, 3 kilos, and cumulatively 4 kilos, and it went to 4.8 kilos between week 6 to week 8. So it sort of plateaued. The average weight loss per week was about 0.6 kilos per week. In terms of their waist circumference, of course, there are also reduction, which is a very good achievement for them. 70% of them lost more than 5 cm of their waist circumference. So this is something that is also very good. And when we look at their physical changes before and after, I just show you example of 2 of our participants. So as you can see, they have actually slimmed down quite a lot, and some of them even had to change their uniform size, which they felt so happy. Yeah, they have never achieved this kind of weight loss before. So some feedback from our participants. The plus point about this program was it was a very easy way for them to plan their meals, especially for individuals with busy working schedule. We basically just have to follow the program of taking 3 VLCD formulas per day. And if they need to eat some vegetables or have some other soups, we also gave them some tips and to drink a lot of water as well. Yeah. This has also improved their self-motivation because of the constant and steady weight loss, and they also felt more energized once they started the program. Self-confidence has improved, especially when they could change to a smaller uniform size. And they appreciated the regular measurement and group discussion sessions, which actually motivated each other. And also, they say that it's very good to have the support from the dietitian during the sessions and also during the WhatsApp chat group. There were some drawbacks for this program, and these are the feedbacks from the participants. It was very challenging for them to actually adhere to 3 VLCD formula daily for 4 weeks and more. After that, they had a lot of family and social commitments where they find it difficult to commit to 3 times a day. So they might actually do 2 or even 1 formula a day. Yeah, some of them actually commented about taste bud fatigue because there were limited flavors in the VLCD. There were only about 4 flavors. So they wish they had more flavors so that they won't get this taste bud fatigue. There were minor side effects in the first 3 to 4 days, like diarrhea and feeling a bit dizzy, but after that, there were no other side effects. It was quite challenging for them to start regular exercise due to their busy schedule, despite sharing with them how they can do home exercises on their own. I mean, even if it's just 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes a day, that should do, but a lot of them still found it difficult to do it regularly up to even 5 times a week. So the opportunities for improvement after doing this trial program was because we did the whole program in a group setting due to limitations in time and other logistics. So perhaps it could be better that we could actually have some individual sessions with the participants to discuss their individual needs and challenges. We need more variety in recipes, especially the soups and salads while they're on VLCD, as well as low-calorie meals when they're on their off days, when they can't do the 3 VLCD formulas a day. Perhaps having a structured monitoring of physical activity using smart devices and apps could help. And long-term intervention and monitoring for weight loss maintenance is something that we can look into. So after the 8 weeks, we had a closing ceremony to celebrate the successes of our participants. And even until today, there are 1 or 2 of them who are still doing it actively and because they want to lose more weight. So that was really a good motivation for them. So in conclusion, this pilot VLCD program resulted in significant weight loss and improvement in other parameters. Regular monitoring and motivational support are important to help staff stay on the program. And of course, more local studies are needed to investigate the long-term effects and sustainability of the VLCD program in Malaysia for weight management. So with this, I end my sharing.
So thank you, Ms. Foong. Now, we have heard our two speakers. So we are now at the question and answer session. We will have to see what the viewers have in mind. The question will be fleshed out, I hope, by the Secretariat. Yeah, this is the first one coming up. Was the study conducted purely on intermittent fasting, or did it take into account participant physical exercises? They didn't say which one. I presume this question is for Dr. Harvie.
Presume it's for the Midas study. Yes. So we certainly the focus of the weight loss, quite rightly, is about through diet. We did encourage both our intermittent and our continuous dieting groups to undertake physical activity, even during the low energy diet periods, because people can, I think there's a perception that people can't diet in those periods, but they can. So we did encourage them to do, you know, as you've just heard, the sort of 5 lots of 30 minutes of cardiovascular, but also resistance exercise to try and maintain their lean body mass. And they had a bespoke support from our physical activity coordinator. Now, we did ask them to do that. I have to say, I think adherence was not great. And probably to get people to adhere to physical activity interventions is sometimes as or more challenging than diet. So we certainly did ask both groups to do it. We didn't really probably have a great success with that. So that is definitely something, and that, but it's more important probably in the maintenance phase, we think.
Okay, is that all? Is there anyone, while we're waiting for the next question, may I ask, okay, how about alternate days intermittent fasting? Can we use very low energy diet too? Again, for
yes,
Harvie?
So obviously I've talked about our 5-2 model. There are various other models of intermittent fasting. So the other one that's primarily been studied by Krista Varaday, which is alternate day fasting. So you're doing your 600 calorie diet one day and then you're eating normally the other. So yes, that you either do a food, they started off doing food-based diets. I know they've also looked at formula diets, and again, I think you're getting a slightly better adherence with a formula diet with those. So yes, they do work. I haven't talked about time restricted feeding, which is you know, there isn't that much evidence yet that that's beneficial, but that's another aspect of intermittent fasting that is being increasingly looked at. But yes, alternate day fasting is another model that could be either a food-based 600 calorie diet, or you could use the formula diets to do that.
just to continue to this question, I'd like to ask you, Dr. Harvie, most of your studies you would refer to as, eat the Mediterranean diet. You see? Now, my question to you is that 2 days, okay, is the regime, but the 5 days, Malaysian can't eat Mediterranean diet.
Okay, no, it's a very good point. So when I'm talking about, so it's not a great term. So I guess what I'm talking about is a diet that is about 45% carbohydrate, 25% protein, 35% fat, and healthy fats. So, monounsaturated fats rather than saturated or primarily monounsaturated rather than saturated, certainly, and polyfats. So I must admit, so I guess it's a typical Malaysian diet, slightly higher in carbohydrate.
Yeah, we
love
our rice.
Yeah, I know. I came to Malaysia in 1999. It was fantastic. So yeah, and the reason we take that diet is, I guess, because we're working in a population who, I mean, they don't follow it. That's the problem. Who can adapt to follow it, but it's just because that's a diet that, in terms of satiety as well, I think, and I'm sure you're aware of all this literature. There is literature that certainly, a diet needs to have certain amounts of protein and even fat to create satiety. Very high carb diets aren't terribly useful in a weight loss setting. So I guess that's why we go for that model. It's really to sort of get away from the very low fat, high carb diets that people were using sort of back in the 90s. But they do need culturally adapting for sure. So that's so nobody's really created a. I don't know what weight loss diets are normally like in Malaysia. Actually, you just reduce the standard
that
diet.
will be Ms. Foong's to answer us. What are the chances that we adopt or adapt the Midas study here in Malaysia? Looking, I mean, that could be the future research for our dietitian.
That would be really interesting.
Using typical Malaysian diet for the 5 days, not Mediterranean diet. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And so, so obviously in this study we use the formula feed. In our dietary studies, we tend to do 2 days of a low carb diet. Is our food-based version of the 5-2 diet. So it would be really interesting to do it in Malaysia. That would be great.
Good. Any question? Any other questions, Secretariat? Yeah, this is a question for Ms. Foong. Do you think that the VLCD group counseling and your staff pilot program can be applied to outpatient setting?
Yes, I think this can be done, and in fact, we have done it as like an outpatient setting because but the main thing is you have to screen through your participants well, because we need them to be on it for at least 8 weeks. You see, yes, it can be done. You can do it as a one-to-one session or as a group, but because we had 10 of them, and it's quite challenging to actually meet up with them one-to-one basis every 2 weeks. So we actually group them together on those sessions. Yeah, it can be considered.
Great. Any other questions? Hi. Okay, I would like to ask Dr. Harvie. Okay. Yes, your 5
good question.
diet and 16 method.
Yeah, so probably I normally, when I was gonna sort of have my disclaimer at the start that I wasn't going to talk about time restricted feeding. I was going to talk about intermittent fasting, but it's a very good question. So there's a lot of interest in, so 16/8. This is the idea that you consume all your food in an 8-hour window in the day. There's a huge amount of interest now in animal models. It's amazing. If you look at some of Sachin Panda's work, you restrict an animal's food intake to 8 hours a day or 4 or 6 hours a day and let it eat whatever it wants the rest of the time. it will be a lighter weight than an ad lib fed animal. It will have less diabetes, cancer, dementia, you name it. It's really effective in the animal model. I think in the animal models, it's doing something slightly different. So a lab rat or lab mouse, it's doing something to the circadian rhythm, which is probably possibly not what we're going to see in people. So it's a very interesting area, and I think we probably do all eat too much too often, and we certainly probably do need benefits of not eating, or periods, spells of not eating. So there isn't that much data on time restricted feeding yet. There is some studies, there are ongoing studies, and some stuff's coming out. I guess some of the questions around it are, I mean, obviously, if you ask someone to eat in a short window, then they're generally going to limit what they eat, and it will be effective for weight loss. I think some of the question marks around it are around the effect on lean body mass. We know certainly older, frailer people need to have regular protein to maintain their lean body mass, and one of the findings in the recent, there was a big American study, and the name is just eluding me, they actually were suggesting that there was some reductions in lean body mass with time restricted feeding. So lots of questions that we need to ask, and it could be applied to patients with diabetes. It certainly has it's a very interesting method, but we haven't got a huge amount of data. We certainly don't know which is better. I think people will need to do different approaches and what works for them. So good question.
Yeah. Our last question, I believe, from the Secretariat. Yes. For long-term management, if patient experience weight rebound, can they restart intermittent fasting with VLCD?
Yeah, so I guess the long-term weight maintenance after, so you can get someone to lose a lot of weight in that first 8 to 20 weeks of the diet, but it's the holy grail of trying to keep them off. So yes, in our Midas study, we only allowed them 1 relapse, and really we should have allowed them more. So I think that probably would be very, very useful strategy. People can go back to it and do it for a short period of time. We, when we do our next studies, we will build in more behavioural support and more chances for relapse. I think, yeah, we really need to look at that maintenance phase. That's the hard bit, definitely.
Right, then we now come to the end of our session. Really, it was, for me as a nutritionist, although I follow work by dietitian, but we're never involved with patient care. But it is interesting to know that, there are many things that the dietitian can do, and not just, I mean, take up some research aspect of your job spec rather than just, giving dietary advices. And it's good. We can collaborate with Dr. Harvie, who you've done all the baseline things, so we should try to see if things work. The same thing could work in Malaysia using different diets. Yes, yeah. And I'm sure the other dietitians that are following this session will take a cue from that. So thank you again to both of you. Foong giving us a Malaysian scenario, but I'm not too sure. Do you work with other dietitians in the other hospitals? I hope you have some collaboration with them and continue your good work. Yeah, right. And also, I have to thank the participants. I'm not too sure how many of you are around today, but thank you for joining us, and I hope you have taken up some cues, especially the dietitians, on how to treat your diabetic patients and maybe other conditions too, because the diet, Dr. Harvie started with cancer, for instance, and then she moved on to diabetic. So I'm sure that you can modify the diets that she has suggested or proposed in the talk. And lastly, thank again to the organizer or the host, Nestle Health Science, for this webinar and inviting Masu to be part of it. Thank you.